Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I am continuing on the series of Trump's executive orders in order to clarify some of the issues that have come out, and in order to make clear what's going on in the world of politics in regards to the executive orders. Now, as many of you might have heard, there was an action that was brought in Washington State, and that judge, which happened to be appointed by former President Bush, being a Republican, essentially gutted the executive order, put a temporary injunction on it, and essentially said it was unconstitutional. And note that this is just an executive or a temporary injunction in order to prevent harm from accruing while the actual action itself is still being litigated. Now, the Department of Homeland Security then appealed that a temporary injunction by the judge in Washington, and it went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the district judge in Washington and left the injunction in place. Today, there are briefs going on both sides in order to show why, basically the temporary injunction should be permanent and why the constitutionality of the executive order is unconstitutional and the various provisions it has violated. There have been 97 huge companies which have joined with basically submitted amicus briefs in order to state why the Muslim ban is harmful to their companies. And even some companies have stated that if the ban were to be back in effect, they would have to actually build factories outside the United States in order to hire these people to do the programming and the products and everything that they do. During the weekend, after the district court judge in Washington issued his decision, Trump, in usual fashion, got out and tweeted against the judge, basically called him a so-called judge, essentially stated that if anything happens, it's the judge's fault, and essentially stated that there's absolutely no basis for the decision and it'll be overturned. Now, as many of you might not know, the judge is prohibited from responding to these attacks. So the judge essentially has to sit there and allow Trump to go on unfettered with what he says and what he does. But the reason I wanted to bring all this up was as a background to show what checks and balances are and why, as of right now, they are working. As many of you saw, when Trump decided to sign this executive order creating this Muslim ban, this blanket ban, which, in essence is really racist, he sat there and he just signed it and thought, showed it to everybody and thought that, his executive order, minus the Constitution, minus the legality of it, minus anything other than him just wanting to do it, would go forward without any opposition. Well, as many of you know, there are three different branches in the U.S. government. There's the executive branch, which is, of course, where President Trump is. That's what he leads. There's the judiciary, which that is where the district court judge ruled as unconstitutional the executive orders. And then, of course, there's the legislative branch, which makes the laws. So each particular branch has its own duties, its own responsibilities, and each particular branch actually provides checks and balances if another branch decides to exceed its authority that it is allowed. So when Trump decided to make this particular um, executive order resulting in the Muslim ban. Clearly, as you can see, lawsuits sprung up all over the place, and a U.S. District Court judge essentially overruled and stopped his ability to just move forward in violation of the Constitution. And so, minus the fact I believe and hope that it is showing Trump that there needs to be a semblance of following the law in regards to issuing executive orders. If it's not, then the checks and balances, which were made hundreds of years ago by the framers of the Constitution for this very reason, still is in effect and works today. It's great. And the same thing happened when former President Obama did his executive orders. He had so much on there. The district court in Texas essentially gutted some of the executive order. It went up to the appellate court, the Fifth Circuit appellate court, and it ultimately went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And when all said and done, there were certain parts of President Obama's executive order that were taken out and were never enacted. So same thing here with President Trump. And so, there's more checks and balances than just this, but as you can see, it is definitely working, and it looks like within the next day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will rule on uh, whether or not the executive order or parts of it are not constitutional, and it is likely that whichever way it's ruled, it'll go up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then they'll make their ruling on it, and then you will see whether it is for or against Trump. You will see that the president of the United States does not have unfettered discretion to give executive orders which we'll see are in violation of the Constitution. And as I've stated before on other videos, it seems to me crystal clear apparent that it is in violation of the Constitution, of freedom of religion, and certain other provisions of the Constitution, separation of church and state, and so forth, as to why it should be reversed. But we'll see what happens. But we'll hope that the executive order or parts of it are deemed to be unconstitutional, so that only the parts that fall under the Constitution and are legal will actually be able to go forward from here. Okay, more on the coming videos.